Do you remember watching old World War II movies where the Germans were demanding,
"What have you done with your papers?"
well, how did we get to the point where you not only have to constantly provide your identity papers, but you have to be x-rayed and sexually molested to travel? Why are only a minority of us bothered by this? How did we lose our freedom and dignity? And how do we get them back? Well, the answer to 1984 is 1776. Colonial Americans would never have tolerated this from a government that, in their view, had been created to protect their God-given rights. But Americans today are very different from Americans in 1776. The difference is the education and conditioning we receive in government schools. In 1948, Orwell wrote 1984, which explores the horrors of an authoritarian government that has taken away freedom and dignity. But that same year, an American, B.F. Skinner, also wrote a novel about a totalitarian government. But Skinner viewed total government control not as a horror to be avoided, but as a goal. His later book on behavioral psychology, Beyond Freedom and Dignity, is required reading in many colleges of education in the area of behavioral psychology.
Now we have to put the world in order. It will be a long and complicated struggle, but we have the unity of a common order and a common knowledge.
There are many different theories about what a perfect society should look like, but all the social engineers agree that the key to accomplishing their vision of utopia is to get control of children at the youngest possible age, separating them from their parents and attaching them to the state. Skinner sought to abolish family, religion, democracy, capitalism, freedom, and dignity in his ideal society.
The new world begins.
Just look at the results. In 1984, the Ministry of Truth was responsible for all education, fine arts, news, one source, one authority for all information, which freed the Ministry of Truth from the concern of actually telling the truth. With the continuing centralization in education, our government is increasingly considered to be the authoritative final arbiter of what goes into textbooks and curriculum. It even influences the choice of textbooks for most private schools and some homeschoolers. At the same time, the schools have been at the forefront of adopting all aspects of the surveillance police state. No tactic is too severe for the Ministry of Love to use in protecting its students. Teddy bears with cameras, pencil sharpeners with cameras, ties with cameras, cameras everywhere, checkpoints, locker inspections, metal detectors, police. 5,000 in New York City schools alone. Constant surveillance. No freedom, no dignity. Our centralized government schools have become a combination of many love and many true. GovSkul is 1984 on training wheels. Textbooks today are constantly updating the past to reinforce the social engineering fad of the day. The founders, who valued individual freedom, have become unpersons, vanished, written out of the textbooks in favor of contemporary persons who embody political correctness. The students adored the party and everything associated with it. The songs, the banners, the drilling, the yelling of slogans, the worship of Big Brother. It was all sort of a glamorous game to them, systematically turning them into ungovernable little savages. Yet this produced no tendency to rebel against government rules. All their ferocity was turned outward against enemies of the state. How do we answer this Orwellian nightmare? The answer is 1776. There was no Federal Department of Education in 1776. There was no Department of Education even in 1976. America rose to greatness with a population that was educated at home or in small, locally controlled schools under close supervision of the parents. The literacy rate in colonial America without GovSkul was higher than today. 20th century figures that were homeschooled included the Wright brothers, Thomas Edison, Douglas MacArthur, and George Patton. The generation of Americans that defeated the institutionalized fascist followers of Hitler had on average 8 years of school. A couple of generations later, and our institutionalized children are in school from age 3 to 22. 19 years, and they're arguably more dependent and definitely more socialist. So how would 1776 look today? For starters, we take back our children from the socialist planners and the social science experimenters. Government control of education is government control of our children. We stop the government control of education by stopping the flow of our money for education going to the government and only a portion coming back to us. We stop the government from defining education by selecting curriculum and textbooks. Government control of education must be abolished for the same reasons we don't have a state church and that we shouldn't have state-run media. You can't have freedom of religion or freedom of speech if you don't have freedom of education. I'm not arguing that we abandon education, but that we stop abandoning our children to government institutions to raise. Do you not agree that sending your child to a government school is abandoning them to the state? Well, that's what the government says. A federal district court in Massachusetts said in a finding, parents do have a fundamental right to raise their children. They're not required to abandon that responsibility to the state. They may send their children to a private school. They may also educate their children at home. In other words, the court outlined 3 options for parents. Send your child to private school, teach them at home, or abandon them, that is your responsibility, to the state. Parents, teachers, businesses, everyone in society values education. When it is privatized and funded by some mixture of parents, vouchers, and charities, it will be controlled by the people who know and love children the best, their parents.